So, Melissa, we just took this off a horse this morning. We can see that the girth has arena on it and salt and sweat. So the first thing is just like our bridles. This is probably more similar to cleaning the bridle than the saddle. So just take a real quick wipe over with the salt remover so we can get the arena mud off the bottom of the girth and the salt off, and you can see how gray that looks. The gray is salt or mud and dirt, so we want to get that off first. So she's going to just give a nice quick wipe over, and while she's looking again, I'll just remind people to check their billets, their buckles, their stitching, or where the billet goes, so that when you are riding, you are always safe. So that looks pretty good, Melissa. And when you clean your tack every day, it doesn't take long. And I think it's universal that people agree that you should clean your tack every time you ride. We don't always clean our tack for one reason or another. So when you have missed a day or two or three or a week, then you really need to make sure you're taking care and conditioning your leather. So already that looks cleaner, but we aren't finished because we have to recondition the moisture level back in. So which one will you choose? This feels pretty malleable to me. This doesn't feel very stiff. So I probably, I would choose the wax, which is a protective coating, rather than a conditioner, because this girth already feels soft and pliable. So she'll just put a tiny layer of the wax over the top of the girth. And you'll really make sure that you don't over layer or put too much on, because we don't want it to be sticking in all of the stitching, eating the stitching away. So we'll just do a nice brief, very thin layer of this wax, and then we will put the girth where it belongs for the night and let it soak in and be a nice protective coating for the next day. So I'm going to invite Jade back in again and see, do you have any questions about the girths?
Well, you know, we're focusing on the fact that this is against the horse and there's salt because it's in contact with sweat. Would you do the same thing with the billets?
I would do the same thing with the billets, and we're going to do the same. The billets you don't want to over condition either, because they need to have a little bit of stiffness to them when you go to pull up your girth. If it's really gummy and gunky, and they're like, you know, jellyfish, and it's really hard to tighten your girth. Right. So, but yes, we have to get everything that touches the horse salt removed. Cool. Okay, or you know, I mean, I know when I'm riding down here in the humidity, I sweat too. So any place where I'm sweating in the tack here, we also have to pay attention to. But more often, the horses are showing us a lot more sweat on the tack than we are. Okay. So we'll get this to the side, and now we're going to talk about the saddle. The saddle has to be taken care of a little bit differently than your bridle. We have parts of the saddle that do touch the horse. Now this would be through the saddle pad, obviously, but still sometimes you are going to have sweat come through the saddle pad onto your tack. The billets are obviously going to be part of touching your horse, so we really need to make sure we have these all salt removed. We probably aren't going to have salt touching the underneath side of the skirt, or up here underneath the back of the flap. So I wouldn't waste your product. I wouldn't waste your salt remover on any part of the tack that's not touching your horse getting salty. This does need conditioning, however. It does rub. You can see there's some drier spots, some lighter spots, some spots that look like they get a little bit of wear and tear from the leather above. We always want to be checking these spots that are lighter in color for either dryness level or for a little bit of mildew or mold or just arena dust. So we make sure we get all of that off our horse. Our stirrups, you can see, we took this off the horse this morning. We have arena on the stirrups. Aside from having it polished and looking nice, you want to make sure your stirrup and your stirrup pad is clean. If it's got mud and dirt sitting in here, then it's going to be slippery for your boot. So you want to really make sure that this is also clean. And maybe I can pull this down so you can see that the grooves of your stirrup pad also need to be cleaned. So Melissa, let's just start with giving this saddle a little wipe down with your salt remover on where we need to be removing salt, which is billets and underneath. Maybe a little bit in the saddle. This is actually Melissa's saddle, so there is, you can see a darker wear spot here, so a very light rub down with a salt remover on the seat. The seat is very sensitive of your saddle. The leather is usually a softer leather. You do not want to put a lot of conditioner or wax or salt remover or product of any kind on your seat of your saddle on a daily basis. You want to keep it as clean as possible, but not over product the seat. You will have a very hard time with repairing the seat of your saddle compared to, for example, repairing a billet, where there's one piece to be unstitched and a new billet replaced. To replace the seat of the saddle, you have to take the whole saddle apart. So you have to be very careful not to put too much product that will make it too gummy or too soft or too pliable where you'll get a hole, or conversely, if you use too much salt remover or you don't do anything to it at all, then it will become brittle and you'll get cracks in the seat of the saddle and in the seams of this. So you have to be a little more careful about leaving gunky product on your seat as anywhere else on the saddle. How's that coming, Melissa? Okay, so you've got the salt basically removed. I mean, I don't think we're going to have any salt on the thigh block, but you can see that this is a little bit drier. You can see these lines. That's a sign that this tack is thirsty. It needs a little bit of conditioner. So I would use the conditioning cream on a saddle that's looking lighter in color as opposed to darker areas. Even though this is a brown saddle, you can still see the same things with a black saddle. You're going to want to look at the moisture level like you look at it in your hands. If your hands are looking cracked and dry, you need a conditioner or a moisturizer on your hands. It's the same kind of principle for the leather on your saddle. So let's use the cream conditioner on the outside of this saddle. Now, we're going to use as much as we need here, and even maybe underneath, but you're going to be very careful not to put too much conditioner on the seat. Aside from staining your breeches, it's really going to make this leather up here that's a little bit different kind of leather. It's a bit different cut of the hide than the rest of your saddle, so you have to be a little more careful with it. And you can see that as she applies this conditioner, it immediately looks more healthy. It's darker in color. Some products will stain your leather darker, like an oil-based or a neat's foot oil, so if you don't want your tack darker, you have to do a test spot on it somewhere. And she's going to rub that conditioning cream in, and I like to use my hands the way Melissa is, because you can get into every single nook and cranny without leaving like an extra layer where you wouldn't want to in the stitching area. So you can see she puts it in, and then I'm just going to check to make sure I don't have any big creases or gunk of the conditioner. So as it dries or soaks into the leather, it will become a little lighter again, but it will still maintain this kind of glow that it's providing at the moment. So that looks good, Melissa. So this is how we would go over the entire saddle from top to bottom, and the stirrup leathers. I mean, let's not forget about the safety of our stirrup leathers, that we always want to make sure that the stitching that is at the top, now these happen to be Weber's, so these are attached at the top, but they have the same where the stirrup is coming through and taking your weight from the stirrup iron. You always want to make sure that when you're cleaning your tack, you're not seeing splits in the leather or a little bit of crack or a little bit of crease, because then we know that it's not 100% safe, and you could be posting along and one stirrup would get broken, and then, you know, who knows what could happen. So you really want to make sure that you've taken good care of that. Now let's assume we've cleaned the rest of the saddle and we're getting it ready for horse show. We have places to polish on this saddle as well. This brass, this on the grab strap. Some saddles have brass here. Some people will have a beautiful nameplate on the back. So if I were gonna get this saddle ready for a horse show, the last thing I would do would be to take my polish, and you can pick one or the other, and just give these pieces a little scrub so that you bring everything to light. And you can tell it's working because the back of my Neverdoll is turning gray. So then we would finish it by polishing it with a little bit of the dry towel. So any of the brass on your saddle, anything that could be polished should be polished, and that goes for the stirrups also. Now, I would personally use on my stirrups the toothbrush. I mean, we're going to use that for corners of the bits, but this is also a really good way to get into creases. Even if this is a really, really dirty tack, or I've done a lot of rallies and 4-H and pony club clinics, and a lot of times some of this tack has so much grime on it that you really have to get into the stitching with a toothbrush. And you take excellent care of this saddle, so there isn't any of that there, but sometimes you just need a little bit extra reach up into the parts of the saddle that have the stitching. Toothbrush works excellent. Do you have anything else to add, Melissa, on taking care of your saddle? How about you, Jane?
I'm just getting back to the toothbrush, which I think is great. Do we have to be careful that it's a really soft bristle toothbrush so we don't scratch?
Well, most toothbrushes these days are soft anyway. However, I don't think you can scratch your leather too badly. You're really trying to get into the seam and kind of scratch off some of the gunk off of your seams anyway, off of your stitching. If you do this before you condition, when in the cleaning stages, when you condition, it's gonna clear up any. You wouldn't want to use a wire brush.
Yeah.
Like I have a wire brush for other purposes of cleaning polo bandages. Kind of looks the same. If you use this on your saddle, you'll make a mess of that. But go ahead.
Well, I was going to ask, because when you were talking about it, it brought to mind, I was thinking about like with the normal stirrup leathers, and sometimes your conditioner gets stuck in the holes, and as far as cleaning this, would you ever use something like a toothpick or a nail or something to poke through the holes so that you don't have a lot of product stuck in there?
Maybe not a nail, but a toothpick or a small tongue depressor might be a better thing to use that you couldn't actually harm your saddle like with a nail. But a little flat stick or tongue depressor or lollipop stick or something like that to help you get in and out of all the crevices, that would be perfect.
Cool.
So
great.
Let's wrap up the saddle, and then we'll just talk a little bit about your equipment.
Shall we talk about this type of saddle that some
I
people have?
forgot that. So this is your traditional saddle made of leather. This is a synthetic saddle. And the synthetic saddles are very useful for many, many things, and they have to be cleaned very differently than your traditional leather. You would never want to use a soap product or an oil product on this saddle. This is very easy. This takes water and a sponge. So you can use, if you've been out on a long trail ride and you take your horse into the wash stall, you can actually hose this off. We haven't actually hosed this one off because we haven't gotten it that dirty, but you can see that there's mud and there's little pieces of arena and there's some horsehair in here. It's just water and either a sponge or a little bit of a towel. You don't want to saturate it, and so when I say you can spray it with a hose, you're not going to dunk it in a bucket of water. You could have girth maybe. But there is some padding and things in this saddle that you can spray it off, but you're not going to submerge the saddle. So you can see that just a little bit of water has cleaned up this synthetic. It sort of feels like leather. It's sort of like leather, really. And you can keep it buffed up nicely just by using this little sponge and water. So that's a little bit easier, isn't it? Yeah. So you can see, though, that we do have to check underneath both sides. Now this whole saddle is synthetic. We don't have any real leather. But you still need to look at the quality of what your stitching is looking like. Just because it's synthetic doesn't mean that it can't break. So we still have really important stitching to look at, and we still have to make sure that the material that it's made of doesn't have any big cracks, doesn't have any splits in the material. So synthetic is fantastic for a lot of things and a lot of uses, but you still need to check for safety of all these buckles and all these billets, and to make sure that your saddle is in order. And this is also a synthetic stirrup leather, so it goes the same though. We still want to make sure that the dirt is cleaned off, that we have a nice smooth moving stirrup down where we're going to be putting our weight, and that where the stirrup pressure is down on the leather, we don't have any cuts or cracks. And these stirrups come with the little hole where you put them back into adjustment to how long you want it. And you want to make sure when you look at the outside of even the synthetics that you don't have holes or splits or seams that need to be repaired. So they make bridles out of synthetic. Saddles also girths, so they're taken care of the same way. Anything that is a synthetic material, neoprene, or this plectory feeling material or plastic, can all be done with soap and water. So I think we'll move on to some of the other equipment now.